This is not No Man's Sky, and that is a very good thing. Welcome to entry 0.4 of the Starfield Handbook, fellow mumblers of Constellation. Mumble here, and you're in for a treat today as we dive deep on everything you need to know about space in advance of the imminent launch of Starfield in just a few short weeks. We'll be going over space combat, encounters and mechanics, spaceship building and customization, space travel, and faster-than-light tech. There are a lot of overlooked nuggets of information I've uncovered after combing through every source of confirmed information on this topic, and I'm looking forward to sharing my findings with you. As always, thank you immensely to the ever-growing community of mumblers supporting my efforts to provide in-depth, no BS Starfield coverage. And with that, let's dive right into ship combat. It's been nearly 20 years since the glory days of Star Wars Battlefront 2, one of the most nostalgia-inducing games of my childhood, and space battles have come a long way since. With Starfield, I think we're in for what will be a great dance of interstellar dogfighting, coupled with exciting space encounters. From what we know so far about the game, it seems Bethesda has tried to stay somewhat grounded to real-world science, but I'm not going to be surprised or upset if we can pull off some crazy high-G maneuvers in our ships that would otherwise crush a normal human into jelly. Thanks to the footage from the Direct and 2022 gameplay, we have a pretty good idea of how combat will play out, but we're also missing a few details on how dramatically our ship builds will impact our overall maneuverability. I'd be shocked if that Optimus Prime looking ship from the Direct had any battlefield potential. To kick off our combat analysis, let's break down the core weapon systems we'll be using to inflict damage on our foes. Each ship can be outfitted with a maximum of 3 weapons, noted weapon 0, 1, and 2 respectively. We have 5 main weapon types to choose from that we currently know of, each serving a specific purpose in space combat, which we're able to discern from descriptions in the ship builder and skill trees. Energy weapons break down shields. I believe lasers are part of this category as their primary damage stat shows to be against shields, ballistic weapons which decimate hulls, and electromagnetic weapons which provide a shock to the main ship systems to cause them to fail faster. The other 2 weapon types are missiles, which deal massive damage to any enemy but at the cost of having a low maximum amount readily available to fire, on top of an incredibly slow recharge rate, and finally particle beam weapons, which based on the particle beam weapon system's skill description, does damage to multiple weapon systems at once, albeit I'd expect at a lower rate than any of the other more targeted weapon types. Depending on whether you're planning to obliterate your enemies and simply loot the wreckage, or you plan to board the ship and claim it as your own, you want to prioritize your weapons accordingly on your ships. I recommend ballistic and EM respectively for those 2 use cases. I feel like energy weapons, e.g. lasers, will be particularly useful regardless of ship type for gaining quick access to core ship elements that you wish to wipe out. Particle beams could be a great spray and pray finisher against slippery foes that are difficult to target, while missiles will reward skilled pilots with massive damage if they can reliably lock onto targets. Another interesting side note is that it appears that you can double and maybe even triple down on specific weapon types, as we see double ballistics being possible in this example, but I probably wouldn't recommend it as a balance of weapon types seems to be more practical overall to run. As with any upgrades in games, we typically see an increase in price positively correlating to increased power from these shipbuilder examples. The Dragon Laser being a perfect case where for 16 times the price, you receive a 50% increase in power to your lasers. You'll also note that there's a requirement of rank 1 starship design, which we'll see in some later stills as well, meaning we'll have to consciously allocate skill points into starship design to unlock the most powerful upgrades for our ships. With a 16 times increase between rank 0 and rank 1 for weapons, I think we'll be looking at some pretty hefty price tags once we hit rank 4 territory. Something that isn't explicitly clear from these menus is what the sections that state max power and crew capacity actually mean. I'm fairly confident that the 6 in this example is stating that you can allocate up to 6 reactor power to it for 100% output, while the 1 crew capacity means you must have at least 1 additional crew member for it to be operable. Maybe you have to assign that crew to specific battle stations prior to combat as well. The hull stat is definitely just a raw boost to your hull, which is effectively your ship health. As for class, it's still a little unclear, but most images seem to look to the reactor primarily for class ranking, and the general trend I've seen is that Class A ships are smaller on average, while Class C ships are larger on average. Maybe size does matter? If you want more content like this and want to help this one-man army showdown against the well-established YouTube incumbents, then make sure to engage with the video however you feel appropriate by doing all that stuff YouTubers say to do, but only when you think I've earned it. I have some big plans for guides and lore on release that I can't wait to share with you.
We've extended that sense of control to ship combat. It's not about just hitting your triggers to fire your weapons. It's a complex dance between your piloting skills and our power allocation system. Boosting power to your engines will make your ship faster. Powering up the grav drives will shorten the amount of time it takes before you can make a jump. And moving your power to your weapons and shields means you're ready for a fight.
So clearly power allocation is something you need to be managing to optimize space combat. I can totally see myself shuffling these around during a fight to max the juice on my weapons 1 second, only to dump max points back into the engines for a quick loop to get back on the enemy's tail. That power allocation bar that you see is dictated by your ship's reactor, which can hit a theoretical max of 38 points. Individual components can have power allocated to them that caps out at 12, so even if you could upgrade all components to have 12-point potential, you'll only ever fill 53% of the slots at a given time. That's honestly a lot of room to run a reasonably strong combat loadout where you could just shuffle a few points at a time depending on the stage of the battle, since you won't be allocating points to your grav drive during combat. Taking a closer look at the HUD while in flight, we can see our speedometer, which shows our ship casually coast under 100 speed and then quickly rocket up to over 300 by activating our boost, which also has a meter that depletes and regens on the bottom right. I wonder how fast we'll be able to go on a maxed engine ship, perhaps closer to 600-700, since we're only half spec'd in this example. At the absolute bottom right of the screen, we can see our hull meter, which as I mentioned is the equivalent of our health on our ship, and it can actually regen over time based on your upgrades. Shields always calculate up to a value of 100, and each point invested into shields provides a fractional amount to contribute to that 100. 40 in this case with 2 points out of 5. I don't know if I really like this oversimplification versus a true number to reflect how much protection it actually provides. We know that the shipbuilder shows these true numbers, so it's weird that it doesn't while in flight, where I'd personally much rather see exactly how much damage I'm taking per hit from enemies and how strong my shields are relative to my actual hull strength in an apples to apples comparison. A couple other interesting things to note here are the red indicators on the inner part of your HUD circle. They seem to flash red when you actually are receiving fire, but otherwise they just show enemy positions. You've got the ecliptic stiletto indicator at the very top of the screen, and I believe that's actually showing one that is dead. It's the actual looting symbol. And then just below that, the enemy missiles locked on. Obviously, you can be targeted by your enemies, and it's not sure how difficult it is to shake those locks, but I would assume you just perform some generic evasive maneuvers to break the lock. And then also, this is one of the few examples we can see of the game being tested on PC. And the last thing to gather from that clip is that grav jumping can be expedited in real time by reallocating points to your grav drive. The timer started with a countdown of over 8 seconds and then dropped down to 0 in less than half that time after they dumped their points into grav drive. In short, never waste points in grav drive during combat unless it's time to peace out.
You should always be on your toes because you're not alone out there. Unlocking the targeting control system skill will allow you to zero in on specific subsystems of the ship you target. After destroying an enemy ship, you can loot the remains from your cockpit. You can always turn any ship that engages you into scrap. But you can also take a more personal approach by docking with the enemy vessel and boarding their ship. Once you've taken control of an enemy ship, it's yours. Add it to your fleet and retrieve it at any spaceport.
But me wanting to live out my space pirate fantasy in the game, if I'm acquiring certain ships, whether I purchase them or I quote unquote steal one, are those ships locked in at whatever quote unquote stats that they have at that time, or are they upgradable in ways as well?
They're all upgradable. They go through the same. We built those ships with the builder that you all saw in the direct. When you steal one, we do make you register it. If you want to modify it or use it in those ways, you have to spend credits to go register it. And that's for us to keep it from the economy kind of spiraling in those ways. You can fly it around, but if you want to mess with it, you register it, and then you go through that whole loop of upgrading it.
It seems that to successfully engage a target lock, your target must be in the general combat circle of your HUD, and the closer the target is to your actual crosshair, the faster it locks. There's a friendly little indicator on each enemy that transitions from white to red as you get closer to a lock, which is nice for keeping your eyes on the prize. Once you're locked in, you seem to reliably hit your mark. I'm sure we can free fire as well during quick strafing runs where a lock won't be feasible to sneak in some extra hits. The upgrade to this is the targeting control system, which is going to be critical for anyone looking to take out specific components of enemy ships for the purposes of boarding. Once you activate targeting mode, you'll be able to explicitly select the system you lay siege to. In most cases, shields seem like a safe place to start, unless they've got some weapons that you really want to neutralize first. You'll notice when the shields get broken on the health bar, it only wipes a single shield bar off the total on the point allocation display. I'm thinking that this means it only temporarily disables the shield. In any case, in this example, the ship is swiftly taken down, fully destroyed, effectively turning it into a lootable scrap pile that you can secure from within your ship. If you were listening closely, the enemy says that they got the grav drive at the same time an indicator shows up on the health bar stating the same. This probably means that the enemy ships can also retreat using their grav drive if you don't incapacitate them fast enough. We then see an example where the engine is taken out, and this is where you'll want to be more strategic with targeting systems, as engine damage seems like a prerequisite for boarding an enemy spacecraft. Here's one of the only instances I found of options we have for docking an enemy aircraft from the 2022 gameplay. It's interesting that we can see a few details on flight, weapon, and life support systems here, perhaps indicating the ship's usability if we're considering fully capturing it. I'm also not sure what get up means versus board. Maybe you must perform the get up to climb to the airlock before being able to initiate the boarding, maybe providing an option for negotiations pre-boarding as well. At this point, we can then decide to board that craft and choose aggressive negotiations or perhaps more peaceful ones and leave with just the loot or new ship. But you might be wondering, how is it possible to fly this battered ship that I just laid waste to back to a spaceport? I'm thinking that as long as you have enough crew members, someone will fly your original craft home and you'll fly the conquered one back. However, you may have to do some minimal repairs to the craft to get it going, as we can see there's an option to repair on stolen ships. But it could also be as simple as reallocating points over to the engine on takeover, or that you can only properly steal ships that are in strong enough shape to make the flight to a spaceport based on that pre-boarding readout we saw from the 2022 example. We know that in order to modify these ships, you'll have to pay a fee to register it, but I'm not sure how lucrative it'll be to sell these conquered vessels instead. I'm also wondering if we could even just scrap them for parts if they have some particularly desirable components. Alright, we've covered most of the combat-focused content in space. Now let's take a look at some of the other space encounters we can come across in our travels.
When you leave a planet and head into space, you'll be navigating asteroid fields, having chance meetings with interesting strangers, dogfighting in space, and exploring derelict ships.
Are there black holes in this game?
I'm going to pass on the first question.
I came across some hostile zealots in space, but because I had chosen a trait that made me the same religion as them, I was able to get by without any issues.
Let's see, just a few weeks ago I had landed on one of the early planets and this sandstorm blew through and I went to run away from it, and this, ships can randomly, once in a while they can randomly land, like enemy ships can land. So I'm going through the sandstorm, the ship landed, and I get in this firefight and I got on the ship, and while I'm shooting the guys on the surface of the planet, the ship took off into space. So now I'm in outer space on the ship, and I was just like, can that happen? I guess that can happen. Yeah.
On this ship, the gravity whatever the gravity generator was on the fritz, so you'd be walking along, and then the lights would flicker and the gravity would go off, and then you'd start floating. Oh. And so then you're kind of floating around. And like you saw in the direct, if you have like a shotgun, you'll get blasted back, and then the gravity will come back on, and you drop back to the floor. And so that allowed for some fun physics moments.
Lots of promising stuff from those clips. I think we're going to be surprised by some crazy space encounters that haven't even been teased in any footage we have of the game yet. First is obviously the potential for some black hole encounters, which I think we're very likely to get at some point in the game, given Todd's plead the fifth answer on the Kinda Funny X-cast when asked about it. As for ones that have been teased, it's cool to hear Ispan mention navigating asteroid fields. I think it would be a lot of fun to do in combat. Derelict ships will be fun to explore, and I imagine it being just like diving for sunken wreckage, where we'll be stumbling across the remains of ships from crews that ended up lost in space, or destroyed in the midst of a chaotic space battle. Maybe we'll even encounter some unwanted passengers while we poke around. Todd's mention of being in ground combat and then boarding a ship that took off mid-fight up into space is pretty cool. Then there's the mention of your grav simulator potentially crapping out in space, which will definitely make for some more dynamic space encounters. I wonder if we'll have an option to manually disable that as well, and how responsive objects are going to be to those changes in gravity. It can make for a messy situation for the sandwich lady if everything starts floating all of a sudden.
Just like when you're planetside, there are plenty of sights to see and stops to make on the way to your next adventure. Like these massive star yards. Walk the halls, talk to the crew, maybe get talked into buying a whole new ship.
A civilian in my star yard. Let's see about getting you a proper ship, one worthy of you.
That first look at the star yards is pretty cool, and if we're able to properly explore all of it, then they're actually giant. There are multiple levels to this UC star yard, and it's clearly outfitted with vendors for ships, and I would expect other more general trading too.
Maybe you'll dock with a gigantic battleship, like the UC Vigilance.
The UC Vigilance we see here is actually the highest level entity we've seen footage of to date at level 100. It's not explicitly clear whether you can engage in combat with it, but the fact that it's leveled makes me want to believe it's possible, and I'll damn well try to take it down for science. It would be sick if to take it down you had to cripple multiple core systems, just like in Star Wars Battlefront 2, while smaller ships continue to barrage you.
Or rub elbows with the galaxy's wealthy elite on a cruise ship fit for the stars.
It's neat to see this Terran Preservation Society celebration on the cruise ship, as Terran typically refers to humans of Earth specifically, though we don't know what definition Bethesda is using for Starfield. It's really unclear what they are preserving. Are they preserving Terrans, Earth itself, or are they simply Terrans preserving things in general that they believe need preserving? I don't know. I wonder if there are some other wealthy elitist societies we can party crash to, and whether we'll be able to uncover some more unsavory things about them along the way.
There are plenty of personal encounters to be had as well. You can hail any ship you come across to trade, swap info, or maybe even commit an act of piracy.
Let's do this.
When I'm playing, I generally go crazy. I definitely go like the more piracy routes. I want to take over ships. I'm going to board ships. I'm like, this is now mine. I steal all the sandwiches and put them in my cargo hold that I have specifically for sandwiches. I don't want to play the hero, but I want to go out and just start taking things from people as quickly as possible.
If I'm going to New Atlantis and they scan my ship and I do have contraband, what happens?
You'll have to wait and see.
Ship hailing is a cool, more dialogue-focused way of initiating NPC interactions in space. I'm curious how trading will work in this situation. Like, will you have to dock with the ship and board it to actually trade, or will they simplify it? There's some generic dialogue options we can see here, and perhaps some can provide you with quests if you pick up some interesting rumors. Piracy is obviously the more aggressive interaction, and I'm not sure you can hit the piracy option and the NPCs have a chance to give up right away, or if they'll always put up some sort of fight or try to run away with their grav drive. I'd guess it's probably some sort of mix. With regards to contraband, this only actually applies to certain items. It's not a blanket statement against stolen items, which makes sense. I guess smuggling stuff like Aurora would be one of those, perhaps some other more volatile compounds, and perhaps some weapons as well. There are special ship modules you can outfit your ship with that can be used to hide contraband, which is cool, and I'd also guess that without them, you'd still have a % chance of getting your contraband through security based on certain stats, or maybe you can bribe the authorities to let it through as well.
Hello, stranger. I just finished cooking up some food. If you want to come on over, just pop on by.
Some of the best moments are the ones you discover on your own. The thing I love most about Starfield is that it is a Bethesda game through and through.
A quick look at friendly old grandma, who we can supposedly visit for a meal. I could totally see this being bait and grandma ends up being some sick evil lady.
Then, realizing 2 hours later that you're involved in a completely new story.
You're human. We thought we were the only ones to leave Earth.
And finally, we have another unique encounter that looks like a setup for a new questline with some travelers that are clearly unaware of the space colonization that's happened over the past 300 years. And last but not least, Space Nirnroot. So obviously there's a lot to encounter in space that we currently know of, and surely much more to discover on launch. And that wraps up our first portion of the space entry. Make sure to get your notifications set up so you can be first to catch part 2 when it drops shortly. As always, thank you again for tuning in. Let me know what other unique space encounters you think could be in store for us in the comments, or drop a space route down there. If you aren't caught up on previous handbook entries, then make sure to check those out here. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.